Good afternoon and welcome to this keynote lecture on the challenges of the transition towards a circular economy and the corresponding implementation. And it is my privilege to introduce Elin Bergman. Elin is co-founder and managing partner of Nordic, Hotspot and Cradlenet. She developed the international network Baltic Stewardship Initiative to enable the recirculation of nutrients in the food sector. I'd like to remind you to pose the questions using the application that was developed for this purpose. And without further delay, I'd like to invite Elin to give her keynote lecture. So Elin, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here today, but I actually wish that I was in Portugal because right now it's cold, dark and raining here in Sweden. So it seems to be much better weather in Portugal. But I'm here to talk about the circular economy transition and especially about the transition and implementation, the challenges with it. And first, I want to start with tell you a bit about the organizations I work for. So Cradlenet is a business network in Sweden. It's one of the world's oldest circular economy business networks. We started already in 2009. So it was actually the year before even the term circular economy was founded by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So we've been around for a very long time. And what we do is to inform, educate, inspire businesses and the policy sector to accelerate the transition into a circular economy in the region. And the Nordic Circular Hotspot is a newly started organization that I'm also a co-founder of and managing partner of. And what we do is also try to accelerate the transition into a circular economy in the Nordics. And we do that by trying to get more collaboration between the Nordic countries, but also all other countries like Portugal, for instance. And we also try to get an overview of what's going on in the Nordics because there's so many initiatives and projects and so on. And it's a very, very hard to understand what's going on in the different countries. So we're trying to really get an overview. And we also developed something called the Nordic Circular Arena, which is a digital platform where it's a co-collaborating space where everybody can log in. It's for free and open for everybody, even you in Portugal. So if you want to read about what's going on, you can register and log in and share your experiences. It's all about knowledge sharing and sharing projects, materials, events, whatever is going on in the Nordics. Yes, so that's a bit about my organizations. But what I'm here today to talk about is not the linear economy that we have today, but I want to start off to talk about the linear economy because the current economy that we have today is not sustainable. And the reason for that is that we build it on consumption. And the consumption we have is designed to not last for very long. We make it out of fossil fuels. We make it out of fossil materials a lot. They're designed to be trendy and break very fast. And then we throw it away and we buy new things. And that creates a lot of garbage dumps, but it also destroys the value of the materials. And we keep doing that over and over again. And what will eventually happen then is that we will destroy the value of the materials. We will also drown in garbage, and we will also run out of a lot of the very important materials and resources that we need. So this is not sustainable. So what we need instead is a totally new economy. When we talk about the current economy that we have today, we create a lot of waste, we destroy the materials, but the economy that we're talking more and more about is the recycling economy. But that's not the circular economy, because the recycling economy still creates a lot of waste. But the circular economy is like, how can we create ecosystems to really make sure we optimize the use of the scarce resources we actually have? And I know Anna Granskog, who was in the panel before me, she kind of mentioned some of these slides before. So I will go through them again, but maybe more in detail. So I will give you the basics of the circular economy. And I try to inspire you because it's the last thing today. So I will give you some energy and inspiration, for I hope. So Anna showed you this one. And it's, if you just explain this and you look at the blue side of this, this is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. The blue side is the technical ecosystem, and it's about the finite materials. It's the materials that we will run out of if we don't take care of them better. So today we mine a lot of these. It's minerals and metals and so on, but it could also be plastic, for instance. So if you look at this blue side and look at the user, it's the circular economy is more about the user, what it needs, not so much that it needs to consume a lot of things, but mostly the consumer is in need of having a nice life. And that includes traveling from point A to point B, for instance. But that doesn't really mean you need to own a car. It's all about like, how can we optimize the use of the resources and the needs of the user? And when you design things right from the beginning in a circular way, we can actually, instead of own things, we can start sharing things. It's about designing things right from the beginning, maintaining and prolonging the life of things. But also, once it's broken or so, it's meant to be refurbished and repaired and remanufactured. And then, in the end, you can recycle it, because that's the last thing you should do, because it takes more energy and also usually devalues the materials. And we need to keep the value of the material as high as possible. So recycling is good. It's a very important step, but it's the last step you should do in the circular economy. And if you look at the green side of this, it's about the living materials we have, the renewables, the things that can grow again, the growing ecosystem. And to give an example, what that means is if you take a forestry product, for instance, and you make a wood table out of it, you make sure you design it right from the beginning so you don't pollute it with poisonous paint, for instance, or glue. You make it not trendy, so it lasts for a very long time, so you keep liking the table. And once you're tired of it, you can sell it on second hand, and you can make other people use it. And once it's worn, they can make other materials or products out of it, like cardboard or a shelf or something. But the important thing is that if you want to close the renewables loop, you need to actually take those nutrients you first took out of the forest and put it back into the forest again. Otherwise, you're not closing the loops, and that's not a circular system. And also, we need to make sure we don't burn so much, because when you burn things, you destroy the material. Some things need to be burned, and that's when you have poison and chemicals that are needs to be taken out of the system. Then you can burn a small, very small amount of what we burn today. But so the foundation of the circular economy is that waste is a resource in the wrong place. So if you look at the waste garbage dump there, it's actually a lot of value in that. And in some ways, we figured this out already. So you look at secondhand, for instance, the secondhand stores, sometimes the older products can be actually more valuable than the new products. So in that sector, they kind of understood the value of the products, but we still throw a lot of good things away all the time. So we need to keep them in the right place, but also that's why it's so important to have high quality products. They need to last, and we need to be able to fix them and repair them. Another thing that I think is very important, but we don't talk so much about in the circular economy, and I think we should talk about more, is we have so many resources on the planet that we can actually share it. There's no need to have a very poor side and a super rich side. We can share all the resources, and I think circular economy can really help with that. We can go from a greed-based economy to need-based sharing economy instead. And another thing that's also important is that the new generation, they're not so interested in owning a lot of things. Owning actually causes a lot of stress. So it's about more of the experiences. How can we make sure we have a good life and experience so many good things as we can and create memories instead? So the new trend is spending on experiences. And I think circular economy can really help with that. Two key things about the circular economy is the collaboration part and the transparency part. And collaboration is something that's not very something that companies are used to, because before they always talk about how can we take market shares from each other. It's almost like companies are at war with each other. Now in the circular economy, the biggest competitors need to actually collaborate with each other in the whole value chain. And that also creates a need for transparency. You need to have a transparent value chain and share your knowledges and collaborate much more with your competitors than before. So this is usually a question that I ask the audience. Now I can't hear what you're saying, but when I ask the question and how circular they think the world is today, I usually get a number about 30, 40% maybe. But this circularity gap report that came out this year by Circle Economy, it's showing that it's not such a circular world that we have. The number is actually, let's see if I can change the slide here. It's 8.6% circular. And this is looking at all the material flows on the planet. And that makes this, they're actually looking at the recycling part. And like I said, recycling is the last thing you should do. But the number is very important to know, that we are over consuming the resources we have on the planet, and we're not recirculating the valuable materials that we have, that we need to do. This is also a very important map. It's made by the Global Footprint Network. It's showing when during the year the countries are kind of over consuming the resources we're supposed to use for this year. And the countries that I circulated are the ones that are worst. The best country on this map is actually Indonesia. They are in December, they're starting to overconsume what they have. But that's very, very sustainable. But if you look at the worst country on this map, it's Qatar. So already on February 9th, they are overconsuming the resources they're supposed to have during the year, and they start to consume what's coming the year after and the year after that. So we're kind of taking the coming generations' resources and using them today. And also, if you look at this circulated countries, the Nordics are also on the top 10 worst. And actually, Portugal is not super good. It's starting to consume next year's resources on May 13. So we have still a long way to go before we have a sustainable consumption. And I know you've been talking about this in the panel before and during the day today, but we really need to merge the climate change issue with the circular economy issue. And I would say the circular economy is a really great tool to make sure we meet the Paris climate targets, because between 45 and 70% of the global carbon emissions can be cut through circular economy systems. So we really need to start working more circular. Circularity is a very good tool to meet many of the Agenda 2030 targets. And like I said, it's all about taking care of the scarce resources we have. And one of the things that are very scary, if we think about we need to move into a low carbon economy, is that some of the materials we really need to meet the Paris climate targets are at stake at running out. And this article in Popular Mechanics show this, that we might not have the materials we need for solar panels and wind turbines, for instance, that we need, because we are wasting the precious resources we have. And these are just some of the materials: cobalt, lithium, nickel, aluminum, iron, gold, and copper. Very, very important. And just to give an example, if you look at electric cars, or actually if you look at a normal so far fuel car, they use around 12 kilos of copper. But in a new electrical car, they use around 120 kilos of copper. And we have already reached peak copper, which means it's more and more expensive and it's harder and harder to dig out new copper out of the ground. So what are we going to get the copper from to actually have the electric cars we need? So I think many of the answers are actually lying in our electronic waste dumps, because there's more gold and copper in those that is actually in the mines, all the mines we have combined. So we really need to make sure we don't have garbage electronic waste dumps from the beginning, but instead take care of the resources we have and using. So now I'm going to tell you a bit about circular economy and policy. I think this could be interesting for you as well. And I'm going to use Sweden a bit as an example, because I think it's interesting for you to see a bit what's going on in Sweden. Everybody thinks Sweden is very, very way ahead of many countries, but we have still a long way to go too. So this is Stefan Löfven. He's the Prime Minister of Sweden, and he said in the 21st of January 2019 that Sweden will develop the resource-efficient, circular and bio-based economy. Swedish consumers must be able to make sustainable and chemical-safe choices. This was really a very nice starting point, and a very, I would say, a thing that I've been waiting for a very long time, since I've been working with circular economy since 2014, and I think this was a very happy moment. And what happens since then is that the Swedish government has produced a strategy for circular economy that was published on July 9th in 2020. And the year after, now in February this year, we have an action plan developed for the circular economy. And the focus areas in those two are that we're going to have a circular economy through sustainable production and product design, through sustainable ways of consuming and use materials, products, and services, through non-toxic and circular cycles, and circular economy as a driving force for business and other actors through measures that promote innovation and circular business models. So this is really a nice first step when it comes to transitioning Sweden into a circular economy. But if you look at Finland, for instance, which is our neighboring country, they are already on strategy number 2 and action plan number 2. So they are way, way ahead of us. And a lot of the points that came out in the action plan, which was a 100-point list, has actually already been implemented or decided by the EU. So I'm not very sure that it's a very ambitious plan, and we don't even have a national target for when the circular economy should be put in place. And I think that's very important. We have a very ambitious climate target. Sweden is going to be net neutral by 2045. But I think we can't make that target without the circular economy, and it would be great to have that at least at the same time. Sweden should be circular by 2045. I would prefer 2030 or something, but yeah, that's me. And another thing we do at Cradlenet, the Swedish organization that I work for, we produce a report every year called the Circular Economy Outlook Report. And what we did in that was that we asked the biggest 100 companies in Sweden, what are their status when it comes to transitioning into a circular economy? And what are they lacking? What are their needs? And so on. We also asked experts and scientists in Sweden about their views on the circular transition. And what we found out was that there is some confusion, because there is no global definition of what the circular economy is. So right now there's around 160 definitions, I think, out there. And I know because I wrote one of them for WWF globally, for instance. So there need to be one global definition of what circular economy is. Otherwise, people and organizations can make their own definitions, and that's not sustainable. Another thing that's a challenge is that there's a difficulty to set goals for circular economy targets for businesses. So because there's a lot of tools being developed, Ellen MacArthur have one, and there's a plethora of tools out there, but companies don't really know which one to use. There's not a global tool like we have for climate carbon emissions, like the GHG protocol. Everybody knows how to calculate the emissions by scope 1, 2, and 3, but when it comes to circular economy targets, they don't really know how to act. So there needs to be one global tool as well. Or maybe many tools, but they need to be globally certified or something similar. Another thing that's also very complex or complicated is the industrial symbiosis. There's so many challenges with that. And I will go through what industrial symbiosis mean in a while. But basically, it's about when one company's organization's waste becomes some other organization's resource. That's an industrial symbiosis. There's also a big need of standardization, circular standardizations, especially when it comes to reused and recycled materials. There's a lack of supply of recycled products and recycled materials. And there's also a lot of marketplaces that needs to be produced so that companies can actually use another company's circulated materials. It could be recycled bricks or wood or whatever, plastic. And also when it comes to circular procurement, there's very few that actually asks or demands circular materials and know that to put in circular asks in the procurement process. So there's a lot of lack of knowledge there. And far from everybody has started with circular economy business models. And when we asked them, it was about 3 out of 10 that actually had a circular strategy put in place in those large cap companies. And when it comes to knowledge, that was the biggest obstacle. There's still such a big lack of knowledge, not only when it comes to the value chain, but overall when it comes to circular economy. People need more knowledge. And this is also why we started this Nordic circular arena, because we're trying to gather all the reports, everything ever written, all the events recorded, infographics and everything, so everybody can find everything in the same place. And also so we don't do the same type of research projects over and over again. We need to know what's already been done and make sure we implement things instead. And last but not least, there's a difficulty to influence the consumers for more circular and sustainable consumption. So there's also a lack of knowledge and the need for more communication. And now I'm going to talk a bit about what's happening in the EU. So you probably mentioned this earlier today, but there's a circular economy action plan put in place. It was adopted in March 2020. And the action plan contains initiatives to influence the entire life cycle of products. So production and design, consumption, waste management, and the market for recycled materials. So some of the things that we talked about before, there's a market needed, they're already working on, so that's good. And it also identifies 5 sectors where actions throughout the value chain are giving a particular priority. And that's plastic, it's food waste, it's critical raw materials, the ones that I mentioned before, construction and demolition waste, also a very big thing, and biomass and bio-based products. So look at the Circular Economy Action Plan. There's a lot of things going on there. Another important thing for companies to know about is what's happening with the EU taxonomy. And if you don't know what it is, it's about how we can get the financial flows in the EU to go to only sustainable things that are actually in line with the Paris climate target emission targets. So it's a huge job that's been going on for many years about how we can decide on what's okay to invest in and not. So they're going to kind of develop an EU classification system for environmentally sustainable economic activities, is what they say. And one of those focus areas or objectives is the transition into a circular economy. So there will be a long list of what to invest in, and it's also supposed to be circular. So if you're not circular, you're not going to get any investment. I'm very sorry, in the future. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the circular economy business models. And I think Anna Granskog before mentioned some of this, but I will go in a bit of detail more than she did. But first and foremost, it's very important to know that about 80% of the climate impact is actually in the design phase. So if you design a product, if you design a service, make sure you do it circular, because this is where you can do the most climate impact. And yeah, circular design, super important. So I will start off talking about that. So let's see if I can change the slide here. Yes. So circular design. This is an example with Fairphone. It's a company that made the phone out of circular materials already, recycled materials. They made sure that they designed it so it can be repairable. You can even change your own battery if you want to do that. They even have instructions on how to repair your own phone. And they build it in modules, so it's easy to change the camera if it breaks, or change the memory, or so on. So it's all about repairing and maintenance and make sure it lasts for such a long time as possible. So circular design, a very good example. This is something that Anna mentioned, actually, Caterpillar. They are working a lot with resource recovery. And it was a genius idea, I think they had, that I think should have been, from the beginning when they started the company, but it wasn't. They had a problem with all the old machinery that they produced that were rusting on people's farms. And people needed to buy a new product after a while, and they were kind of ashamed that their old products were still standing around and being broken. So someone at Caterpillar found out the fantastic idea that maybe if we take those old machinery, broken machinery back and make it into new product instead, would that work? So they tried it, and it was very successful. And now they have remanufactured not only parts, but machinery. So resource recovery, very important. Another thing that's coming more and more is reuse. When you take a product and you make it into something else, make it another reusable product. And I know Swedewood is located in Portugal. They are working with IKEA. And IKEA has a very good example of reuse. They're taking back their old cabinets and furniture and making it into other things. So this is, for instance, beehives and flower pots and so on. They try to reinvent the already used products. So reuse, very important. And also here's a very good example when it comes to reuse in buildings. This is a public procurement project. It was made by Gothenburg City. And it was the assignment went to white architects, and they were supposed to do the interior design of a public building in Gothenburg. And they got a budget out of 12.8 million Swedish kroner to do this project. And they decided to, maybe we can do these, the whole interior design in a circular way. So we use reused materials. And they actually went 70% under budget. So they actually saved 9 million Swedish kroner to do this. So there's also a lot of money to be saved, like was mentioned before. But this is a very nice, concrete example. Another business model is product as a service. And this is an example of the company Signify. They were actually part of Philips before. Philips that sells a lot of products like refrigerators and different electronics products. You probably heard about them. They got a call from a company, I think it was in the Netherlands, that asked, we have a totally new office building and we don't want to hire a person just going around changing light bulbs. What if can't you make it into a service instead? Light as a service. So Philips thought that this was a very interesting idea. It wasn't really in their business before, but they thought about it, went back, and they came up with an idea. And so now they have a service that not only having renewable energy into the building, but it's also about the armatures, the actual lamps, and then the light bulbs And so their service actually the amount of light over your table or in your office. And that was such a success that it kind of made it into a new company called Signify. So now it's all about Signify having the product as a service lighting in your office. And there's some other very famous examples of this too. So the Swedish company Spotify, you probably heard of. They took this plastic CDs, you remember, they were shipped all over the planet, fossil fuel materials. They took up a very big part of your living room, and they got scratches on them, and then you have to buy new ones. But Spotify disrupted the whole sector and started having all the music in the world in your phone instead, in an app. So they really went from product to music as a service. And it's the same thing with Airbnb. It's the largest hotel chain in the world. They don't ever own a single physical hotel. They're just sharing the resources we have. They rent out people's apartments, but it's still the biggest hotel chain. So they have hotel space as a service. Brilliant idea. Another circular economy business model is upcycling. And this is one of the companies at Cradlenet, Tarkett. They have taken a really nasty product, ocean ghost nets, the ones that are killing dolphins and tuna and so on. They're just drifting around and turtles, drifting around, killing things. So they're taking these terrible plastic ghost nets out of the water and turning it into very nice office carpets instead. So then upcycling is about how you can take a bad waste product and make it into a very nice product that lasts for a longer time, that has higher value. That's upcycling. And two other examples, we had the Swedish fashion brand Lindex. They took old worn out jeans clothing and made it into a more high fashion collection. And also Adidas also took some of those ghost nets and made it into nice new sneakers, even though it's a very small percentage, but still upcycling. Recycling we've been talking about is the last thing you should do in the circular economy, but still very important. And there's more and more new materials being recycled. This is an example, Swedish company H&M. And I think someone mentioned before that both IKEA and H&M has set fantastic circular economy targets. They're going to be fully circular by 2030. So it's just around the corner. Very inspiring for many, many companies around the world. But H&M are very much pioneers when it comes to recycling textile materials. And they even have collection bins in their stores. So more and more new materials are being recycled. And I think before Benedita told about what they're using their ash for, so you can use it for nutrient recycling and so on. So there's more and more things and materials being recycled, which is fantastic. The sharing economy, many have heard of. It's about, like I said, using your resourcing much more efficiently. And this is also why digitalization is very important in the circular economy. Because if we don't have a digital space where we can find and share things, then it's impossible. So digitalization is a very important tool for the circular economy. And here's an example, Vacanza, for instance, is a Swedish company that's also members of Cradlenet. They are sharing office spaces. So there's, especially during the corona, we saw there was a lot of empty office spaces. And when you're at work, your apartment is available. So why don't we optimize the use of the resources we have when it comes to office space? And then we don't need to build so many offices and new buildings. The most circular and sustainable building is the one that's not been built. Very important. IMO, car sharing, Volvo car sharing, you probably heard about. But there's also other types of sharing, and there's more and more coming every day. You probably have those electrical scooters in Portugal as well. We have, I think, 10 companies here in Sweden. But rental is about sharing tools. Instead of buying a power tool when you need it for 5 minutes, you can rent it. So you don't have to take up space in your apartment or in your house. So rental, also sharing economy. Another thing that's coming more and more, and this is mostly for the food and retail, textile sector, is the regenerative production. And it's about when you go into a field, it's probably been used for a long time, and the soil quality is bad, and it's emitting a lot of carbon, it's very low biodiversity. But if you start to use regenerative production, you actually add a lot of positive things to when you farm. So you will actually gain more soil health and more biodiversity and still have a very nice crop. So Patagonia is one of the companies behind this fantastic certifications. I would recommend that you go in and check it out. I hope regenerative production will really take off. And now I come to the thing that I mentioned before, the industrial symbiosis. And like I said, it's all about how one company can use some other company's waste into their product. And this is a Swedish company called Crumbs. It's a beer company that figured out that was one of the biggest waste materials, organic waste materials in Sweden, is bread, old bread from the bakeries and from the stores. So if they could use this bread and make beer out of it, that would be fantastic. So they tried it out and it's working. So now the waste product from their beer production is actually something they can make biogas out of, and the waste product from that is actually nutrients that can be put back on the fields so you can grow more crops that you can bake bread of and make more beer. So you really close the loop. So industrial symbiosis. And in China, they're really, really good at this. They actually made industrial symbiosis parks where they really look at the whole system and try to match the companies so they can become an ecosystem together. In Sweden, we have traditionally made industrial parks that are just about textile or IT or something, and that's not really creating industrial symbiosis. We really need to make sure we think about this when we create these business parks from the beginning. So now I'm going to the end of my presentation here, the challenges with circular economy transition and implementation. And some things to really speed up the transition to a circular economy is that we need a clear universal definition of what circular economy is. So everybody knows it's the same thing. We don't have different definitions. We need a global system for measuring and setting goals for the circular economy, and it needs to be kind of similar to the GHG protocol that we have for climate carbon emissions. Research and funding should not only go to innovation, but actually upscaling and implementation. In Sweden, we have kind of like a project economy that we do new innovative projects all the time. And then when that project period is up and we had made a fantastic pilot, we go into making another innovative project instead of building it up, make sure it's implemented and scaling it up. So more implementation and scaling up funding is needed. We need standardizations of recycled and circular materials. There's work going on already, but there needs to be faster and it needs to be put in place. We need not only a market for recycled products and materials, I think we need many markets. And there are markets popping up every day, and we try to gather everything in the Nordic circular arena. Education and tools needed for circular procurement and everything circular. More education needed. Requirements for circular business models. And I think this is something where the EU taxonomy will really help out. And knowledge-raising measures for the circular economy in general, like I said, we really need to have more knowledge so businesses can move faster and know what to do, where to start. And we also need to make it easier for consumers to do sustainable and circular choices. So to end off, doing less bad is not good enough. We need to do better, and we need to act faster. And that's it for me. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here.
So thank you very much, Elin, for your presentation. And now we have time for a few questions, and I'll start up with a question that is not exactly a question, but more of a statement. We as individuals and not just as companies, what are we doing in our daily habits and routines to contribute to a more circular and sustainable world? Or in other words, what we should do as individuals to contribute to a more circular economy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think I can only answer for myself. So I try to only buy secondhand, for instance. I eat vegetarian. I don't fly. I take the train everywhere. And this is the reason why I couldn't come down. So because it's a very long time to travel down to Portugal, even though I love Portugal. And it's all about making the really sustainable choices and try to make sure you're aware of what you're buying and consuming, and make sure you really try to use the things that you have for such a long time as possible. So my phone is recycled, for instance, it's secondhand, and my computer is secondhand, and they're refurbished. Yeah, so I think we really need to think about the consumer choices we make. But there's still a lot of things we as companies need to do first, because the consumers are always slower to act. So we can make sure that it's easy to do right for the consumers from the beginning. It's so much better than to wait for the consumers to act.
Okay, so thank you very much. A follow-up comment is, of course, you have identified a number of technological challenges that must be met to move us towards a more circular economy, like digitalization or design for circularity. And I would say that those are necessary conditions, but maybe they are not sufficient if we don't change the mindset of the consumers. So what do you think are the main roles of the social sciences and education to change the mindset of the consumers, to change their habits in terms of what they buy and how much they buy?
Yeah, like I said, I think it's very important with education. And I think Finland is the country that's probably come the furthest. They have a whole strategy for education from kindergarten up to universities and so on. So education, 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 super important. Doesn't matter if it's general public or companies. So very important. But like I said, the consumers are always slower to act. So if we can, as companies, make sure that if you go into a store, you can't make a non-sustainable choice. They should be all sustainable and circular, because then they won't have to make that choice. That would be the best thing that could happen. And I think digitalization and transparency will help with that, but not so much for the consumer, but for companies as buyers procuring a lot of things. They need to do the sustainable choice from the beginning.
Okay, so there's an additional question, and the question is taking the Nordic countries that I think are seen as an example in terms of circularity of the economy. So how much better are they comparing with the 8.6% of circular economy worldwide? So what's the circularity in these countries?
In Sweden, we're actually doing a gap report now, so I don't have the number, but I know that Norway are not doing very well. They had a circularity gap report done last year, and they were only 2.3% circular. So if you look at the global average, they are worse. And compared to the Netherlands, which have a 16 I think it was just 16% circularity, it is really, really bad. And I'm hoping Sweden will do a bit better, but I'm not so sure.
Okay, thank you. And there's another comment, it's more of a comment and maybe some relevant information as well. An example of the disruption in the clothes market. EcoAlf, a Spanish clothes brand that use wasted removed from the ocean to produce clothes, like the example that you gave from Adidas, I believe. So it's another example. I'm not sure if you are aware of this company, so it's more of a comment, not so much of a question. And another question is whether you believe in a circular economy at all cost, even when it is not sustainable.
No, of course not. And I need to emphasize that the circular economy is not a silver bullet. It will not take care of all the problems on the planet, but I think it's a very good and powerful tool. But there's a lot of things that can be recirculated that should not be circulated. So we need to make sure it's sustainable, absolutely. And I think there's more and more reports coming out about the negative sides of the circular economy if you don't do it right. So I would recommend that you go in and check those out as well. We try to educate our members all the time about how they should think, and we make sure they are aware about the latest knowledge and science when it comes to how we can make circular economy sustainable.
Okay, and another question is if you have any suggestion on how to avoid greenwashing from the big companies.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that if we have a global definition on how circular economy, what it is, I think that will make it much easier to avoid circular washing. Because right now it's like, yeah, we have this big waste incinerators and we burn everything. It's super circular because we make energy out of it. And that's just fantastic nutrients being destroyed and resources being destroyed. We are doing it now in Sweden, and they're calling it like renewable energy, and it's not. And we need to make sure that we really know what we're talking about. So this is why incinerator companies will not be accepted in the EU taxonomy, for instance, because it's not circular.
Okay, so thank you very much. And there's another question. So the question is, please indicate 3 measures that companies can apply to start circular economy in their business.
Well, I always say start easy, and I think one of the most easy things is to look at your waste. And if you can set a 0 waste target, then you have come a far way. So if you look at your waste product and make sure, or look at it and see, can we make it into someone else's resource, and start working with that. So I think that's my strongest thing that I would work on. But otherwise, look at your business models. There's a lot of tools out there. There's a circular business model canvas you can use, for instance. And otherwise, there's a lot of tools out there for how you can work with your business models. Ellen MacArthur has one, the Circulytics tool, for instance. And there's a number. Circle Economy has circular scanning for your company, for instance. And I think it's always good to do life cycle analysis if you produce products also. So I can go on forever to talk about this, I think, but this is my top tips.
Right. There's a question that actually follows some of the discussions that we have this morning, and I guess this is a tough one. So in order for the planet to change as a whole, how can we convince people that are in the developing countries that are increasing their quality of lives not to consume as the Western countries? So I guess this is not an easy answer, but of course it's a challenge, and we'd like to have your views on that.
I think it's a fantastic question. And I think, first of all, we need to be role models in the West and the richer countries, because like I showed you on the global footprint map, we are way over consuming, much more than they do. But if we can show them, if we don't have to own cars, we can share them instead. If we can make sure we buy high quality things and it lasts for maybe generations instead, they can do it as well. And if you go back 100 years, the whole planet was circular. Everything was in ecosystems. There were no waste. So we just need to go back to the learnings and learn from our grandmothers and grandfathers, because they did it right. We're doing it wrong.
Okay, so thank you. Maybe since we are running out of time, a final question, and since I guess we have the Secretary of State of the Environment in the room, so I'd like to ask you a final question about examples of good public policies that contribute towards a more circular economy.
Yeah, I think the Netherlands and Finland have very good examples, because they have set national targets for circular economy, and that made the whole countries kind of start working, because they know when the deadline is. So my biggest recommendation is to set a national target, like you're doing for climate change, because that will start everybody to start working. Because right now in Sweden we have a very strange target. We're going to become circular, but we don't know by when. So everybody's relaxed. Nobody's stressed like we are with climate change. We really need to have clear set targets that are measurable and can be followed up.
Okay, so with that, I'd like to bring this keynote lecture to an end. Thank you very much again, Elin, for the inspiring presentation. And thank you very much again. Thank you.